Westmark Construction. This is a property that we acquired about 3 years ago. We rezoned it and did a lot consolidation. Um, we are active in the community building, multifamily, among other things, and we recognized this would be an asset to add to the multifamily apartments that we're building. We have a need for storage, and so we have taken the approach that we would build within the zoning and construct what's best suited to our tenants' needs. And Drew will present the detail on the project.
Sure. Can everybody see the screen there? Awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can see it.
Perfect. My name is Drew Fisher. I'm the pre-construction manager here at Westmark. So I've been working with Chris over the past few years on this development, particularly, as well as with the rest of our design team. Like kind of Peyton mentioned there, we've got three new single-story pre-engineered steel buildings with an accompanying office. Storage units are going to be varying sizes. We've got about 340 total. The building designs and layouts, they've been developed in collaboration with professional storage consultants and local steel building providers. We've also tried to configure these buildings on site to accommodate the existing natural grading on site there. I'm sure we can speak to a bit later. The intent of this site is to be secure and monitored 24/7 with on-site caretaker and video monitoring. So that's why we've got the accessory building there as well. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. So what we can do is I'll go through our presentation a little bit here of a rendering kind of the site plan, and we can get into a few more details. Chris was able to speak about Westmark and what we do. So like Chris mentioned, we're a construction manager, general contractor, and developer in the Nanaimo, Mid-Island region. And on this project, we'll be kind of taking on all those roles of a developer and builder. The property, as mentioned here, is down in the Chase River area, 1044 and 1048 Old Victoria Road. So we consolidated those two properties and went through a rezoning recently. And everything's in line with the City of Nanaimo OCP. And we've gone with the I3 high-tech industrial, which is permitted for this use. So some of the surrounding area there has a mix of industrial, residential, and community service zoning. So we've got the Kingdom Hall Jehovah's Witness next door, and across the street we've got quite a few residential areas, and you can see some of the industrial stuff that's neighboring and around. Got another shot here of kind of a better view of what we can see looking at the property specifically. So up the way a little bit here on Old Victoria, we can see some industrial businesses, and neighboring our site is the site for the future temporary housing that's going through, as well as some residential stuff along the other side, and of course the community place of worship just south of our property here. So just another shot here from another angle. You can kind of get an idea here of how these buildings will be situated on the property. And from this standpoint, I'll probably pass it off to Jared from Herald Engineering to speak a bit more on the building design details. Following them, we'll have Chris Midgley speak on the landscape stuff, and Drew Beater from Newcastle. He'll be speaking on some of the civil design.
Great, thanks, Drew. Is my volume okay? Can you hear me, madams? Yeah, okay. So yeah, first off, I guess I'd just like to say, so Herald Engineering is the coordinating registered professional on the project. The architect for the project is Alvin Fritz Reinhard. He sends his apologies. He's in Africa right now on a safari, and it's 4 a.m. in the morning. So he is available if we need him in a pinch, but yeah, he's not able to make the presentation tonight. And then we have Chris Midgley from Kinship doing the landscape design, and Drew is going to speak later in regards to the civil. So as Drew mentioned, we're kind of trying to take advantage of the site. It's a challenging site, challenging soils, challenging conditions on Old Victoria Road with the old mine workings. This site does have a slope from the top down to the bottom towards the residential and office space. So these buildings do step internally as you go down the hill to try and take as much advantage of the landscape as possible. Still requires a rather large retaining wall in between the properties. I think on the previous slide that was You could see that with the development property between there and the future temporary housing. So yeah, so we've stepped them down in the corridors in between. So yeah, the top future temporary housing, there's quite a, that's where the tall retaining wall is, I believe, that Peyton mentioned at the beginning, with a fence on top of that that's proposed. We are adjacent to the highway as well, Trans-Canada Highway. And so there's some consideration in relation to that view and how the project is presented from that angle with people and traffic on that road, as well as Old Victoria Road, which is a little bit below the development as far as elevation goes. I think so yeah, building size, we're just over 1,500 square meters, about 1,300 square meters, and just about 8.5 square meters for each storage building. And then we have a small office with a caretaker suite above. I think if you go to the next slide, please, Drew, we can kind of just give an idea of there's a section through the property with the sloping and the steps and storage buildings as you come down. I think the next slide just gives an idea of a little bit of currently proposed colors for the buildings. Got some orange overhead doors, potentially red for man doors, and we have Rustic Road, which is currently right now shared between storage buildings and I think that's the same on the next page for the office and caretaker suite as well. So yeah, so the office and caretaker suite, I think there were some comments in regards to that from staff and in regards to articulation and how that is facing the highway. And so the building right now is designed primarily as to look more so like a residential dwelling from the backside. And then as they mentioned before, just the office space inside on the first floor. Also has an attached garage, small balcony, and overhang protection on all doors. I think with that, it's Chris's turn to talk about the landscape design.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. The landscape design for the project is essentially to provide an effective buffer around the site, if I can simplify it to that extent. We're proposing a relatively lush, layered indigenous planting to fill the 1.8 meter buffer that would surround the site. We're in if looking at this plan itself, you can see in the top left corner, effectively, there's a group of some retained trees. There's some large Douglas firs in that area that we're able to retain, but for the most part, the site itself is already quite cleared. I think you could get that impression from the shots that Drew provided. So, in keeping with the Chase River Neighborhood Plan and guidelines for industrial uses, aiming to really have a visually interesting and lush buffer around that. If looking a little bit closer around the caretaker's office, you can see that there's provided a little employee rest area and also a small rain garden. Again, a small nature-based solution to mitigate against the otherwise impervious nature of the site. You'll notice that there's a lack of trees along the highway frontage, and that's a result of a sanitary sewer line that precludes the ability to plant trees on that site. If you were to look at other sheets in your package, they're not here in the presentation, but the planting plans L201 to 203, you'll see that we've provided a fairly generous planting along that edge with the largest shrubs and other plants that we could put and again to create a visual screen to the site. And further to that screening, you can see planters located at either sides of the buildings to create a bit of a softening of that edge. At the bottom, sort of, I guess, southwest corner, you can see a small entry sign visible from the intersection of Melodio and Old Victoria Road. That's again a fairly simple landscape plan for the project. Like I said, attempting to address the intent of the Chase River neighborhood guidelines. You heard Jared speak of the retaining wall at that northern limit of the site between the two parcels. I think it's the north side. At its highest, it's 4 meters, and hence the need for a variance. The chain itself is a chain link fence, but it's exempt from the variance as the two uses allow for a fence there. But the retaining wall itself does require the variance in order to have the flat parcel. That's the consequence. But what we've done to moderate the prominence of that wall, as you can see in the section A there, is taken at the highest point of the wall, and we're proposing trees, columnar oak trees, Quercus palustris pingreen for the landscape architects in the room, and just a slope, again, sloping the base of that wall to the extent that we can, also to further mitigate the height of the wall. Elsewhere on the site, so the sections B and C, the wall is much more reduced in scale, but again, maximizing the screening to minimize the prominence of those walls. The section C there is the highway frontage and speaks to what I mentioned previously about putting shrubs in that area to not hide, but to add visual interest along that edge. That next slide, if I may, okay, so here's an image of the fence. I mean, it's a fairly standard chain link fence you would typically see on an industrial site. We're proposing a black mat vinyl mesh with galvanized black poles, disappears nicely, providing safety and security given the drop on the retaining wall side, but also around the site generally, like I say, for safety and security. Exempt from regulations, but it's at the height that, a 2.4 meter height that we feel is appropriate for the use. Again, I think that's pretty well it. I think that if I'm happy to answer any questions on the landscape.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the civil side of things. I think the main point of interest is in regards to stormwater management. I think Chris and Drew have both kind of spoken about the grading and the efforts that we've gone to through the building design to try and minimize that wall height. On the stormwater side, this site ultimately does drain into the Chase River, and therefore we need to provide on-site retention and detention, which we're proposing on doing through infiltration trenches following the stormwater pipes down each section. There will also be a flow control manhole, which ultimately regulates the flow leaving the site, keeping it to the pre-development level, which is what's required by the bylaw. Like Chris said, there will be a small rain garden providing some, limited treatment and detention for that particular area, but in general, each portion of the site will have their own detention pipe. So we feel that there's plenty of required storage to meet the bylaw requirements. So circulation has been reviewed, fire truck accessible, and for all these various areas of the site, as well as for the moving and general delivery vehicles that'll be heading through. I think the next slide is just a little more detail on the grading, which again, I can speak to that if anybody has any specific questions, but again, highlights just the effort and the thought that's gone in, articulating the buildings to try and step this site down from the highest point there on the north side sort of the northwest down to the southeast. That's about all for me.
Yeah, so that brings us to the end of our presentation there. So I can stop sharing my screen if that's okay, unless there's
Yep,
any
that'd be
questions
great.
that I'd like to go to. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, do any panel members have any questions of staff before we get going on this? Okay, don't see any. Angie, would you like to get started with your feedback?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Madam Chair. Okay, I don't have too much actually. Just a couple things that kind of came to mind as we looked through. I see there's like a couple designated parking areas away from the main buildings, and if there's an opportunity there to have a marked pedestrian pathway to the buildings, I think that might be helpful. And just help the flow there. And then I know the nature of the development, I think is it's challenging maybe to do this, but if there's opportunities to add additional permeable surfaces or look at options for kind of creating some more permeable surfaces so that maybe there is an opportunity to have a bit more of an impact rather than through the detention storage systems, then that might be something to consider. But overall, I think it's great, and I think it'll be a very popular spot. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Great, thanks, Angie. Jonathan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, a few comments. I didn't see much about site lighting, so I'm wondering if there is any lighting for the drive areas or for accessing the units on the outside of the building. So I guess that's just a question for the presenter.
Sure, yeah, the intent there is mainly using lighting off the buildings. So there'll be surface mounted stuff, wall mounted lighting, and definitely some accent lighting around the entrances to illuminate those areas. That's the plan right now.
Okay, thank you. And I guess with a lot of pavement and a lot of roof area on the site, I mean, I'm thinking like in the future for retrofitting for solar or something, if maybe that's something that becomes popular and there's companies looking for places to mount those things. I guess, yeah, these industrial areas maybe will be a potential target for different companies to partner with. So I'm just wondering if there's things you can do now in the design of the building to maybe, if there were to be solar added later on, to make that easier and more effective. Just something to think about, maybe the slopes to the roofs, and if there's any other things that would make that an easier addition later on that could be done now. For the landscape, yeah, there's a staff comment about additional landscape screening around the refuse enclosure. Looks like that's something that's probably not too difficult to incorporate, so I'd agree with that staff comment there. Just a question about the fence. So I'm just a bit confused about maybe some of the terminology, but the fabric, is that just referring to the chain link mesh, or is there like some sort of fabric kind of woven between the chain links?
I'll take that one. Yeah, it's the wire mesh. Sorry if that's a terminology confusion. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I just was wondering if it's
Yeah, I totally understand you. We weren't envisioning the fabric. So yeah, perhaps I can delete that label or something like that if that provides clarity, but just the wire mesh.
Okay. Yeah, other variances, I'm fine with all the variances. So yeah, overall, nothing too major for me to point out. So nice work.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Hector?
trying to cancel. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess my only, I will not call it an issue with the section A of the 4-meter retaining wall. Is there a way that they can add like a secondary retaining wall to reduce the how tall, or at least how it looks not as tall as it is?
Yeah, I can probably speak to that quickly. We did look at that option for a lot of different reasons, but unfortunately, we were pretty constrained with circulation, especially for the fire truck access. So really, we were pretty tight with the location of that building and where the wall was. So we didn't really have much opportunity to put in an additional wall, if that makes sense.
Is it possible in the 1.8 meters of the setback to put that extra 1 meter secondary retaining wall?
At which area, sorry?
The section A retaining wall that is 4 meters. So you have 1.8 meters, right? And you're trying to work with that in that setback, right?
Yep.
Is it possible to do like a secondary 1 meter retaining wall there?
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that we could investigate a little bit more.
Yeah, because I guess honestly it's very important to find ways to reduce how tall that retaining wall looks. I mean, it's pretty tall. Like, I don't know if the members on the panel realize that 4 or 5 meter is like a 2-story house in that area. So
If
it's
I
quite
can,
tall. It's
if,
quite
if I
tall.
could, sorry,
Yeah.
to respond, if I may just briefly respond, all I will suggest in that circumstance is that renders the trees a lot more difficult to place in, because you're going to narrow the width quite considerably. So I just offer that as a consideration in response to the feedback. So it is a bit of a juggling between to mitigate the prominence. So I take your comment, but I just wanted to stress that might be a factor as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. That's a good comment. And I'm not a landscape architect. That's Jonathan. But anyhow, that's my only comment. Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Hector. Hillary.
Thank you. I think the site looks good. I appreciate the staff comments around the site lighting, and I think the panel's comments have been good so far. Support the variances. I did ask staff previously about sidewalk along Old Victoria Road, but understand that that's not actually in the scope of design panel. We're just focusing on form and character of the actual site. So yeah, appreciate all the feedback, and thank you to the presenters.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. Okay, let's see, what do I have here to say? First of all, form and character, I guess, is basically, it's very suitable to the context and to the neighborhood. I think you've done a good job of sort of figuring out how to situate everything on the site. I also appreciate your efforts to work with the landscaping to separate and shield the development from residential neighborhoods, particularly adding fencing and the different landscaping, so that's great. Also great to see a bit of outdoor amenity space added with the live-in accommodation there. No problem with that. The building itself. I mean, it's both a functional building and a place to live, and it's nicely designed and suits the purpose. So that's good. I was wondering, are you gating the property at all?
Yes, that'll be part of our security. So it'll probably be rolling gate, but there may also be fob access to the gate as well as each building. So
Right.
still working through some of the details on that, but.
Okay, so there was nothing included in the plan, or did I miss it on that? What would you use for a gate? Like again, the black mesh or something?
Yeah, black fabric mesh.
Yeah, well, I think the term fabric. Yeah, I got the same impression Jonathan did. I thought, are they putting that fabric on the chain link fence? Anyway, okay, so it'll sort of match with that, and yeah, makes sense. The one thing I noticed, I was looking at the buildings and realized you had interior sites. So you have a hallway and you have access into those buildings. What kind of doorways do the people going inside have? Are they glass doors or not?
I can take that one if you
Yeah.
want, Drew. Derek and I had a quick conversation about this earlier before. So there is in this drawing, and I think it's in the staff report too, it comments on one of the doors on building 2 being a fully glazed door. And then there was some comments about like the option or the possibility of creating more glazed doors. And while I think it's nice and it's a good idea, and it definitely does make it look better from a functional standpoint, it's a storage building. And so when people are coming here, they're bringing boxes and they're bringing trolleys and carts and dollies and lifts, and they're trying to get through doors with those. And so fully glazed doors are not going to last very long, or they're not going to hold up very well. On building 2, we have that fully glazed door. There is some interior steps inside. So that door is there specifically because they wouldn't be able to go through that door with a dolly or a cart or something like that. But all the other doors, because there's storage units on the interior and people are likely coming through with stuff and, backing into doors and things like that, or using accessible buttons. And so that's the rationale for these storage buildings not having a lot of glazing in the doors.
Okay, I thought it would add a little bit of light, not a lot. Those hallways would be very dark and have to be artificially lit, obviously. But I just thought it would give you a little bit of light, or even if you could have partly glazed, I don't know, but just a thought. And maybe mark them in terms of color or something to really define where they are, compared to, say, one of the garage doors into the exterior.
Yeah.
So the other question I had about that is, I was looking at your parking situation, and there's not a lot. So somebody using the interior storage has to go through one of the doors either at the end, and then there's doors in the middle on a couple of the units. So are there going to be like reserved parking for somebody who wants to unload there? Because if they park in front of somebody's garage door, they may be in the way, and then they'll be in the interior and somebody shows up, wants to open their unit on the outside. It just seems to be a little bit awkward. Or they're crossing, they're parking in a different part of the site and then having to cross over with their things to go inside.
Yeah, so you're right. And so there's a parking stall. I think there's a parking stall at the end of each building, at one end of each building. And then there's a few stalls up in the north corner of the buildings as well for pedestrians that have stuff on the inside. And I think in these storage facilities, that opportunity, like you mentioned, as far as like somebody parking and going inside and doing something inside one of their units, they might be blocking another unit on the outside. It's hard with these. The nature of these are that people are in there for a short period of time, right? And so they're probably they're taking a chance that doesn't happen, that person doesn't show up at the same time realistically in reality when they park. But if they're choosing to park in one of the non sort of more designated spaces, but we always ask, there's always a variance on these because the number of parking stalls also just doesn't usually meet the requirement for a square footage area. And that's the rationale is that people are in and out in a short period of time and they're not there for a long time, and there's not necessarily, everybody's not there at once.
Yeah, I understand
So
that.
the parking is very fluid around there, but I take your point. The ends of the buildings are kind of primarily meant for the main entryways to get inside. To be honest, the midpoint entries are more of an egress requirement.
Okay, so maybe around those endpoints, I would suggest maybe even having them marked that they're reserved for people using the insides, and then you don't have somebody else,
right?
So that they have priority for that, because otherwise they're going to be parking along the side or doing something, having
Correct.
to haul their stuff from a long way.
It's a good point. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think that's all of my suggestions. Yeah. Okay. So I think we've got a few recommendations then. We'd consider adding marked pedestrian. I'm just not sure where we want the pedestrian pathways. I'm sort of personally on the view that there's not a lot of foot traffic in a site like this. The only place I could say might be marked footpaths pathways would be from the ends of the building over to the office, because somebody might park their car and then have to go over and pay their bill at the office or something and walk back. But it just seems to me that marking up all the pathways doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that space. I don't know if do the panel members would like to leave that as a recommendation about adding pedestrian pathways around the site?
I think it could be valuable from like those like grouped parking spots in the two north corners there.
Okay.
If there's an opportunity to tie it in.
So from the north corner to where? To the building?
To probably the doors of the nearest storage building, I would say.
That's corner parking.
Angie, are you looking at the like parking stalls 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Like they're labeled 8 and 12 in the top corner there. So those are the ones. And then to
Yeah.
storage building 3. Okay.
Yeah, one there, and then I was also looking at, I think it's I think maybe 4 to 7, and then over to building 1. Beside the office there's some groups of,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's reserved for staff or if that's intended for storage users, but maybe something there to link that to building 1.
Yeah, it's probably staff is usually pretty minimal in these facilities. There might be one person in the office. If that's the same person that lives upstairs or not, that's the other side of it, and they have a garage. So yeah, there's not required to be very much in the way of staff parking. So that makes sense.
Right. So then consider adding marked pedestrian pathways from the north corner parking to storage building 3 and from the parking area near the office to building 1. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yep.
Consider adding some areas of permeable paving in the parking lot. I don't know, Jonathan, did you want to add something about preparing the buildings for solar? Or is that just a comment?
I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not, personally wouldn't, I think that's up to the owners at some point if they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah, you can leave it out.
It's kind of predicting the future for them. And add additional landscaping around the refuse storage, and consider adding a second level to the retaining wall.
You can leave it out. Honestly, it's like it's an industrial building. It's again up to the owner. Hopefully, it doesn't become a graffiti wall, or if it's a graffiti wall, at least nice graffitis or something.
You're right. And last one, consider adding dedicated parking spaces for the indoor storage. Dedicated marked parking spaces for the indoor storage. So I think so that's 4 recommendations. I haven't heard any objections to the variance. So does that sound good to those 4 recommendations? So does somebody want to make a motion to accept the presentation, the project as presented with, Jonathan, go ahead. You're making the motion?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Oh, okay, with those 4 recommendations. So Jonathan motion, seconder. Angie, all in favor? Great, it's done. Thanks very much for coming in, and great presentation. And good luck with the project.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Madam
lot.
Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to our second presentation this evening, which is a residential project on Mountain Vista Drive. And we have Christine Mays, city planner, who will introduce the project. Go ahead, Christine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, development permit application D1356 is for 1364 is for three three-story rental apartment buildings and a single-story common amenity building comprising of a total of 93 units that are proposed to be constructed in the north corner of the subject property. The property is a brownfield site which is currently vacant and encompasses treed mounds which were established through site remediation. The property is zoned low-density residential, so that's R6, and is designated suburban neighborhood and city plan. The subject property is located between Mountain Drive to the east, and Powder Works to the west. That's south of Rosstown Road. The subject property also falls within development permit area for form and character, and as such, the general area design guide by the proposed development. There are two variances that are being proposed. The first, increase the maximum height of a building, and that's for the 3 residential buildings. So 10.6 meters for building A, from 7 meters to 10.1 meters for building B, and 10.8 meters for building C, as well as to reduce the number of required parking spaces from 136 to 94. And thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to take any questions if you guys have any.
Great, thanks, Christine. Who's presenting this evening? David, okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Share your screen.
Yeah, we'll do a bit of a joint presentation. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Wonderful, okay. My name is Darren Moss. I represent the ownership for this project as well as Tectonica Management, who will be doing the construction management. With me today are David from Checkridge Power and Architects and Danica, our landscape architect from Kylid Services. And we'll give you a brief overview of Lumiere, our project. This site, as mentioned, is a brownfield site. It has a bit of an interesting history and some challenges with it. So if you guys don't mind, we'll do a bit of an introduction from myself, and then we'll pass it on to Dave and Danica to do more of a discussion about the design and how the landscape and the buildings work together. Lumiere is designed to bring a unique rental experience to the central Nanaimo that emphasizes sustainability, renter experience, community, and connection. We feel there's a strong need for well-managed rental units in this area to bring alternate, more affordable housing options to the neighborhood and provide a transition from the Core 2 zoning to the east to the R5 and R6 zonings to the north and the west. We've designed the buildings to foster a community where different generations, cultures, and backgrounds interact in a meaningful way to create a sense of belonging. Lumiere offers a diverse mix of unit formats from studios to 3 bedrooms, with a large portion of accessible units to further encourage this diversity. We delivered and selected 1960 Mountain Vista for Lumiere, as we believe that transforming a long-standing brownfield site into a vibrant multifamily rental unit is an example of how we can leverage our past to create a stronger future for our community. An integral part of this transformation is the landscape design. Lumiere's landscaping and buildings are designed to engage with each other and create the layered experience David and Danica will describe a little later in the presentation. This site is rooted in Nanaimo's mining history. Originally a lake bed, it was infilled during the coal mining operations. It was remediated during the eight-year-long subdivision process and received a risk-based certificate of compliance from the Minister of Environment, confirming the site is appropriate for residential development. One of the realities of this site is that the risk-based certificate of compliance makes it difficult to develop residential properties for sale, as each individual buyer, along with their mortgage provider, would need to be comfortable with the underlying contaminated soils, along with any long-term liability associated with them. This constraint pushes the property towards a single owner and rental units. The other reality of the risk-based certificate of compliance is the historical fill remains in place, creating geotechnical challenges. The proposed building layout is carefully planned to respect the existing mineshaft location and leverage the surrounding private forest established during the remediation of the site. The protected 1.2 hectare private forest is at the heart of Lumiere, providing a direct connection to nature for residents as it matures from the current juvenile trees to a mature forest. Lumiere is designed to prioritize energy efficiency and building resiliency through its form, materials, and mechanical systems. The building's simple stacked building form with non-articulated facades optimize energy efficiency and building envelope resiliency. Juliet-style balconies minimize envelope penetrations associated with traditional decks, which often are a source of water ingress and cold bridging. The low maintenance and durable exterior materials align with the project's sustainability goals by reducing long-term maintenance and eventual replacement. The project will meet or exceed Step Code 3 of the BC Building Code and will also incorporate the following sustainable systems. A minimum 25 kilowatts of solar cells will be installed as part of the original construction. Central heat pumps with heat recovery to allow transfer of energy between units and use of solar energy to offset hydro consumption for conditioning of the buildings. Central hot water to allow use of solar energy to offset hydro consumption for heating of the water and reduce risk of water damage in the buildings. The site is centrally located in Nanaimo and is designed to promote a more sustainable transportation model in line with the hierarchy of mobility prioritized in the Nanaimo City Plan. Its location, adjacent to the new Boxwood Connector, facilitates vehicular movement across the city, but the project is also designed with multimodal connectivity as a priority. The city's multi-use path runs through the site on the southern border and along its western border, promoting walking, biking, and rolling as primary modes of transportation. We have prioritized bike storage and charging as part of this development, as we believe bicycles are an important part of our transportation matrix and will be more so in the future. The proposed building design creates adequate density to offset the additional cost and challenges associated with this brownfield site. The three-story building form being proposed balances the necessary density against the current allowable height in the zoning bylaw and the parking targets. We believe WMIAC strongly aligns with the Nanaimo City Plan as detailed in the design rationale. In particular, City Plan encourages the city to facilitate creative redevelopment of our brownfield sites and allows additional density to be considered in exchange for preservation of open space on brownfield sites. We are not requesting any density. However, the building height and parking variances we are requesting are to balance the unique site constraints against the need to create a financially viable project. We are sensitive to the potential overlook on existing residential properties to the north and have worked to mitigate these as part of the design. David will describe these in more detail later, but I feel it's important to note that the height we are requesting is more or less the same as the adjacent R5 zoning, which has been applied through most single-family lots across Nanaimo in response to the province's clear regulatory changes to prioritize the creation of workforce housing over many traditional planning priorities. We feel that the design being proposed is a balanced response to bring residential development to a brownfield site in an urban context. So thank you for that. Thank you for putting up with my little ramble at the start. But I'll pass it on to Dave, our architect, and then Danica to give a more detailed presentation of the design intent and how we work to bring the site to life.
Thanks, Darren. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So what you're looking at, well, I have some feedback there.
You have an echo now.
Not sure how
That's
that's
better.
going to go away or not. Are we
That's
good now?
good there. Yep.
So we have some photos here of the site, just to give a bit of context. Unfortunately, our Google Maps or Nanaimo Maps isn't super up to date, but we do have some information here that you can see. So the building or the buildable area that we've been talking about is kind of the north half of the site, or the north portion of the site, which is this area here. And the remediated area that has the mounds of this material that has not been taken off the site are in this location here, in this location here. So you can kind of see those mounded areas, and you can kind of get a sense that right now there's a number of trees planted. They're fairly low at the moment, but the owner group has been very careful in beginning the stewardship and getting rid of invasive species and the like, to help propagate those areas. And so it's kind of nice that those areas that have a little walkways on up to the top of them so that you can see. And so this photo here, you can kind of look down into where the building site is and kind of get a sense of where the buildings might be located. This panorama down at the bottom gives a bit of a sense that the building area, which is in here where my cursor is, hopefully you can see my cursor, is kind of in a bit of a valley. So in other words, the mounds on the south side create this kind of high point. The buildings will be down lower, and then the topography of the land rises back up to where there's adjacent residential. So thinking about the various concepts and thoughts that Darren has brought to the table for this project, we as a group try to determine some sort of way of expressing some of these design concepts and bringing them together into a whole. And we bounded about a number of different ideas, and one that kind of stuck out, that's sort of I think everybody can relate to some degree at least, kind of captured a number of these ideas was a campfire. And so when we looked at the arrangement of our site and our building area of the site, we kind of envisioned this kind of vertical elements of trees that eventually will be, very prominent on the site, especially in that kind of mounded area. And so we sort of started with that idea, and as you know, with a campfire, typically, or in many cases, you have a bit of a clearing that allows for a central focus to occur. And so that central focus is usually, in a campfire, obviously, a warm place to kind of meet or what have you, and you usually kind of get around with some chairs and things like that. And so that kind of central element helps to kind of warm everybody up when they're sitting around this campfire. And so the way that we kind of thought about it with regards to this site is that this sort of inner glow that happens is kind of a connection between the center of the site and the peripheral. And so in the configuration of the buildings on the site, the one-story amenity building is essentially the campfire. It's this kind of central building that allows the community that's growing up around them to kind of connect and to be part of one another. And then that sort of that activity that would take place in that building helps to kind of keep that connection to the buildings around it. And so that's kind of that glow that happens in that condition. And so on the site, we have 4 buildings, as were mentioned. We have 3 residential buildings and an amenity building. And so the amenity building is kind of the campfire itself in the middle. And then on the periphery, you have this kind of, glow that kind of, this relationship between these various buildings as they kind of gather, on the site. And so what you have here is you have building A and B, which are on Mountain Vista Drive. And then you have building C, which is kind of just off of Powder Works Road, although this frontage is extremely small. And they relate to each other around this central building, which is the amenity building in the middle. Just before we get into the site itself, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that this building or the site is although it's fairly new in the sense of being built out in the area, there's a number of other sites to be built out. The connectivity is actually quite good already. And so we have this existing multi-use path that kind of comes down in here and then connects both to the east and the south. And we also have existing bus stops. And so there's a lot of ways for people to get to where they need to be. And so this is the site. I'm going to talk a little bit about the site in terms of its configuration, and then I'll let Danica, who's our landscape architect, talk more about the landscape features and how they relate to the other elements of the site. So the entry to the site is off of Mountain Vista Drive, and so it comes between buildings A and B, and it's configured in a really easy kind of driving way, especially for fire trucks to be able to kind of come around in a loop to come in and out of the site. But pedestrians are certainly prioritized in the sense that we have a walkway that not only hits the kind of entries of the building, but essentially kind of guides you through the site in various ways, and allows you to connect not only to each of the buildings in a safe manner with some, obviously very marked crosswalks, but also to the walkway system that already is on the site. You may notice that there's a lot of accessible parking, and that's because we have 15% of our units are actually fully accessible. With respect to the financing that's required by CMHC, and we have when we get into the floor plans, you'll see some of that information a little bit more specifically. We have refuse areas here, and they relate again to the kind of location on the site. And then we also have, you can see here, site lighting that's primarily located around building D that shines onto the parking areas here, and another one here. So site lighting, obviously focuses on vehicular and pedestrian access. One thing that we tried to do, we had a community consultation meeting just before Christmas, and we had some feedback from residents, that especially the residents that are kind of along this area here. And their concern was that they didn't want residents in these new buildings in here to look directly in. We're talking about this one specific person here. So in building B, there's definitely no direct overlook. You know, the units kind of face obliquely to the actual yards and things like that. More difficult to do that here in this area of the site, because we wanted to make sure there's enough landscaping to tie into the existing walkway area, and of course having the landscape in areas on the south side of the building is quite important. But we did make an effort to increase the setback on the side from the required 3 meters to 5 meters. So I'm going to turn it over now to Danica, who's going to describe some of the landscape features, and then I'll come back and finish up.
Thanks, David. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So thanks for that, David and Darren, to describe this a bit more. Our goal here is in 20 years to have a site that's sitting inside this reestablished forest that's being taken care of on the site. So the plant palette is really high on native species, especially a native plant restoration area along the north property line. And just limiting more of the natives along the frontage to use more of the evergreen showier plants there to give a sense of a frontage here, and to also tie into the project to the south, which I'm also the landscape architect on, to pick up some of the plant palettes that we're using along that main Mountain Vista streetscape. So down here we have at Building C the open lawn amenity area to make it more of a rolling parklet feel here for the residents, dog walking activities and whatnot as they connect in with the connection to the more of the commercial area down to the south. And I also did get your comments back about some of the material choices for retaining walls, and I think that's a discussion that David and Darren and I can have to try to tie this into a softer landscape here at the north property, as well as where we have our overlook here, looking into can we do a bit more density of trees to help screen views into this building if that's a concern. Working with the civil engineer as well, we are establishing some vegetated swales to help treat the runoff in the parking lot. So that'll be another feature in both areas, as well as a smaller one at Building A and at Building C. And I'll put it back to you, David, I think, and if there's any questions after it, I'm happy to speak to people about that too.
Great, thanks, Danica. So just wanted to show you some other aspects of the project. So these are a couple site aerials just to give you, again, a bit of context. You'll notice on Building D, there's a solar array that's been set up there. So that's the 25 kilowatt hour solar array that's been discussed previously. I just want to go over this as well. It was alluded to earlier before with regards to our height variance. We have a lower scale zoning, but really everything around us, and as Darren kind of talked about, even in single family, it's really a higher height requirement that's being put out there. And so we wanted to kind of show, if going back to my comment about this site being in a bit of a valley, you can see on the right hand side we have our mound built up here, and then on the left hand side we have the topography that continues up to the single family residential. So so the single family residential being at R5, those houses already, if we look at sort of geodetic datum, they're basically at the same height as the 3 stories that we're showing on our project, and we'll get into the design in a minute. But and then of course, if these houses, the properties for these houses get redeveloped, which seems quite likely, they can go up even higher. And so really, in terms of a height variance, we're only asking for what essentially is kind of already out there anyways. And at the end of the day, if the adjacent properties go to their maximum height, they will actually be taller than us, essentially. But one of the things just to note here as well, and again, we'll get into the design a little bit further as we move through the presentation, which won't be too much longer, is we have a kind of a parapet condition on our buildings that is sloped, that kind of relates to the topography that we're talking about. And so what it's actually doing in this case is it's kind of gently sloping towards where the entry of the buildings, or sorry, the entry to the site. And so it kind of guides your eye towards the site entry, and kind of, you know, the building form essentially allows that to happen. Okay, so we're going to go through floor plans very quickly. We can always come back to these if we, you know, there's specific questions. So on building A, it's kind of a bit of an oddity for Nanaimo, which is sort of a single loaded corridor that has actually access on both sides of the building. And so on the street side, there's actually going to be small patios, and actually we'll show you when we get to 3D renderings what that actually looks like. But basically the buildings A and B along Mountain Vista Drive have a bunch of patios set up that have direct access to the sidewalk. And so it's kind of a lower scale situation that helps bring the buildings to that lower scale, that sort of street scale that I think a lot of us think is important. And then on the parking lot side, it's an open corridor, and so people can, you know, park their cars and come directly into their dwelling on the lower level. And of course, if you live on levels 2 or 3, you can go up the open stairs on the end, or use the elevator. And you'll notice that we have a number of accessible suites. We have 3 on this level and one on this level. So the next building, again, has direct street access on Mountain Vista Drive, and then it has accessible units 1, 2, 3, and then again another one on the second level, obviously accessible by elevator.
And Dave, just
yeah,
one quick note while we have a floor plan up is we've worked really hard to incorporate bike storage in every unit. So every unit that we have has internal bike storage that meets the bylaw requirement, or has a dedicated storage locker that meets that requirement on its floor. So we really did try to prioritize that as we worked through the design.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, because, you know, especially if there's going to be a large proportion of the population that relies on bicycles that are used on a daily basis tend to be more expensive, and people in general want to keep them in their unit where they can. So that's kind of one of our thought processes. And then building C, it has kind of a larger number of accessible units. And again, they're kind of focused on where the elevator is, but there's also some storage areas with bike lockers on each floor for this building. So again, it's just another option or a different kind of condition. People can decide which makes sense for them, essentially. And then there's a bit of a kind of a break on the one side that faces, especially faces the residential neighbors, just to break up the mass a little bit. Although again, we're trying to keep things as tight as possible for sustainability kind of efforts. The amenity building is essentially comprised of 2 things. One are common spaces that relate to kind of a larger common space, and then kind of a multi-purpose room with a small kitchenette and some washrooms. And so, of course, this can be used for, you know, birthday parties and the like, or you know, anything that the residents deem fit. And then there's also an additional bicycle storage maintenance area. And the idea behind this one is that this is for electric bicycles primarily, although it could be just a regular bicycle. There are, in some cases, or for some people's thought processes, some risk in terms of electric bikes, and so therefore we wanted to keep it in a separate building that has a fire separation from the rest of the common spaces. This is also the area where there'll be centralized mailboxes on site. So again, this is a feature that helps people kind of, you know, meet their neighbors, that kind of thing. You know, they're going to see people come to and fro with the mailboxes, and kind of have a bit more community engagement that way. Exterior materials. So as mentioned by Darren, the selection of exterior materials was primarily concerned with maintenance and longevity, really. But at the end of the day, we wanted to tie everything back to our concept of this campfire, and these elements of the trees and sort of the glowing internal sort of courtyard aspect with maybe some other things going on the outside. And so the primary cladding is this kind of brown metal that has a vertical striation to it that kind of mimics in some ways the kind of trees that surround this kind of campfire idea. On the inside, you'll see as we get to some of the 3D stuff, we have either wood that's in a protected condition, or we have the fiber cement panels that have a warm palette that kind of it sort of tells that glow story, that campfire story. On the outside, so in other words, facing Mountain Vista Drive, and on the north of Building C, we have a more cool, muted palette. It's a little bit more natural in terms of plantings, etc. And that's kind of, again, just an idea that kind of links to the trees and its foliage and things like that are sort of on the periphery of this kind of concept that we're talking about. So we'll finish off with some renderings and just some discussion about that. So here's Mountain Vista Drive. So again, we have these simple forms that have these angled parapets that kind of are that sort of speak to the topography of the land, and we have this kind of oops, sorry, not sure what happened there. Let's try that again. Wow, we are really not where we're supposed to be here. There we go. Okay. We have the metal cladding that kind of forms this kind of envelope around the entire set of buildings, but then is punctuated by all these kind of colored panels that start to, again, break up the facade and create a low level of articulation that still creates quite a bit of interest. You can see we have all the Juliet balconies that were discussed earlier. And we also have all these patio areas, and buildings A and B specifically are sort of sunken down a little bit lower than the main road. And so that helps to kind of reduce the scale of the buildings as well. You can see that in some cases it's down like half a story. So it really starts to bring down the scale of these buildings. And then again, the articulation and the kind of striated metal panel certainly helps to break it all down. You'll see that there's, again, some wood panels between units to help with some privacy, but it's a kind of nice feeling kind of walk down the street and have these kind of semi-private areas. So you'll see here as an example on Building A, a little bit more level than Building B, but there's still a kind of slight variation in terms of elevation to be able to get into some of these units that provides that sort of separation between the street and the building. And of course, you can see a nice bit of foliage there to kind of, again, help bring down scale and a nice walking environment. This is the back side of Building A. So this is kind of the area that faces the central amenity building. So you have that kind of glow, that kind of warmth that the protected wood provides, still kind of framed by these the metal cladding elements or the sort of verticality of the trees. And so that idea is starting to come through in this facade. And again, we have this kind of open walkway condition that is unique to this particular building. And then you can also see the pathway that starts to weave through all these buildings and provide an interesting way to get around. Same building here, but with Building B in the background here a little bit. And then we'll also notice that we have some windows from bedrooms that are a little bit higher, but also entrances that are glazed. They'll probably be frosted, but again, it helps to break down the scale and makes for an inviting environment. Building B, a little bit simpler, more compact building, has kind of a glazed entry area and has sort of, again, the wood coloration of the panels that kind of face this interior courtyard area, which of course transitions to the other palette that's kind of around the corner. But in the glazed lobby areas, we're hoping to put some, again, wood, so kind of warmth, again, mirroring this or going along with this idea of the glow. Building C, kind of the short end faces the amenity building, has again a very similar aesthetic that now relates to the lobby of Building building B, where you have this nice glazed area with this kind of very warm wood and warm tones and panels. And so again, a very inviting element on the site. And then just moving around the corner for building C, we have, again, facing south, the same kind of hues and wood screens that help to separate the units, but also we have this pathway that starts to move to the right on the screen that would lead you to the top of these forested mounds. Moving along to the Powderworks Way, again, it's a very small frontage there, and so it's essentially this kind of meadow and planted area in front. And then on the north side, again, the palette there changes a little bit to the cool a little bit for this aspect of the building. And then you can also see, although we have this kind of these sloped parapets still going on to kind of work with the other buildings that we've discussed already, we also have this kind of very distinct cut within the building facade to help break it down a little bit more. And then finally closing with building D, this is the amenity building. So again, this is where the activities would take place. And so we have this, kind of little jewel in a sense, but it's essentially our campfire, as we discussed before, which is this wood structure with wood infill for panels and glazing. And so, when there's activity in this space, people are going to be, very welcome and invited to be a part of this area. And then has as its backdrop the bicycle storage area in the back as almost like a backdrop to that element in front, and it kind of is a bit of a metaphor for the rest of the site in terms of its design. And so here's another shot of that with buildings A and B in the background, and you can see how all the elements and materials tie together but are specific to each actual building on the site. And with that, I think that is it.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. I know we're running a bit long, but there's a lot of time was spent on it, so we wanted to make sure we conveyed as much as we could.
It's a big project. Okay, yeah, if you can stop sharing your screen then.
Yeah, let me try to find out how to do that. There we go.
Figure out how to do that, yeah, okay. Panel members have any questions for staff at this point? Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what if there's like a straight answer for this, but I guess the first thing that stood out to me was just how significant the variances seem, and I'm wondering, like, is there some threshold the city kind of has for, like, at what point does the zoning have to be changed versus just handling it through variances?
I'm sorry, my computer is glitching out a bit. Was that regarding height or parking?
Oh yeah, both height and parking. Yeah.
Sure. So for parking, the city has a consideration of a parking variance. So it is a council policy, and so in this particular case, it's a certain threshold to anticipate receipt of things such as a parking study, and that helps us and through internal referrals to sorts of variances. So that's, sort of what we're anticipating for this and should be forthcoming. And then for height variances, we are looking at city plan policy, usually for typical building height. So in this case, the suburban neighborhood land use designation allows a typical building height of up to 3 stories. And so that's sort of what we're looking for. So in this particular case, there is a 3-story limit on what's being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I ask what's planned for the property across Mountain View from this property?
I can speak to that. I've had the opportunity to work with the base parcel for the last 8 years. So it belongs to a company in Victoria who are in West Hills, down in Langford, and they currently hold the other 4 parcels. We bought lot 5 or the current 1960 off of them. So they have a townhouse development plan for lot 1, which is the one on the south end of the property, but the one across the street has no development plan yet.
Are they brownfield as well, those properties?
Yeah, if we had that plan up, they kind of go from the 1, 2, 3 around the site clockwise. So the bottom south one is lot 1, lot 2, and lot 3. Those are remediated numerically, which means they are totally clean, no constraints. But lots 4 and 5 were remediated based on a risk-based assessment. And so they both have that same challenge.
Okay, just interested, it's probably be residential then, it'll go across the street. Yeah,
I would guess so.
okay, good. Okay, let's, Hillary, you had something to ask?
I just had a question about the staff comment on relocating the refuse enclosures, because I also was unclear about how people were meant to access them. Was that the intent of that staff comment as well?
Correct. You know, whether or not they're pedestrian access, accessible access. So that's sort of what we were hoping to achieve through that.
Yeah, so I think with pretty minor reorientation, we could potentially make it so that those 2 areas that we've designated for refuse that have a little bit better access to pedestrian walkways that we've shown. So we can certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Keeping with that same thing, we really are trying to incorporate mailboxes and garbage and common use areas. Like we want to encourage people to come out and interact. It is really what we're trying to do with this development. So, but with Dave's comment, we can certainly make it more accessible so that it is more in line with the rest of the development.
Okay, good. Great. Hector, would you like to get started?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot. It's a large project, it's a complex project. Yeah, I know Dave and there from a few years now. Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I'm going to start with the easy. I'm not familiar with like brown sites and less with mine sites. So are those hills going to stay, those little 2 hills? Or are you guys gonna remove that soil? What's the plan with them? I really didn't get what's the plan with those hills.
So the two hills that are built were built as part of their remediation strategy. So all the contaminated soils from lots 1 and 3 were brought to lot 5 and piled up, and then it was capped with a meter plus of clean soil and planted as a private forest, covenanted and protected through the city. So they're there in perpetuity. They can't be developed.
Yeah, the other aspect of it, Vector, is that the site itself, the area that we're building on, has limitations on what we can do in terms of building depth. We can't go any deeper, like we can't have an underground of any kind. And there's still an active, well, I shouldn't say active, sorry, wrong word. There's still a mine shaft on the site, and maybe Darren can speak to that briefly, but it's not within the building footprints.
Yeah, so we basically located the buildings around the mine shaft that's there, and we have to cap that mine shaft, much like we did the air shaft as part of the subdivision. So it gets a concrete cap over top of it before we can put the parking lot over top of it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a mine shaft over the parking. Okay, behind building A, I guess, right?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I mean, based on that, thank you. I'm probably gonna make more questions than like comments at this point. So those hills, I know they're gonna get like kind of a new forest. Is there like a landscape plan that shows like any sort of path going through those hills, and how is there gonna be connected, or that's not part of the landscape plan?
That's hard. It's already built, Hector. So it's planted. There's gravel paths that go through between the 2 mounds on top of a right-of-way for the sanitary and storm lines that run through those 2 hills. And those are protected by covenant as a municipal right-of-way. And then there's a gravel path that goes up both hills to the top and little seating areas that we're hoping to do. So those already exist. So they're not part of this construction project because they were done as part of the subdivision.
Okay, so that's okay. So my understanding is that you guys basically are not gonna touch them anymore, right? There's no more landscape to be done on them. Is that correct?
A lot of maintenance. Yeah, we have a long-term commitment to maintain that forest. So invasive species control, we survey and GIS and all the trees every year. So there is a stewardship of that forest that happens for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Okay. In terms of forming, I mean, I like overall the design. I think the entry building C is pretty cool. I like it a lot. I would like to see more on between A and B. I don't know if more spacing or something that looks more like this is the entry of this development, because I think right now, like, because of the massing of A and B building, it's just, okay, there's a road in the middle, but really I don't see any change on the form and character in the corners between A and B to suggest that that's an entry. And again, I guess there's gonna be some sort of signal, a sign or like totem or something to maybe create it more of a like, hey, this is the entry of this development.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
So
Yeah,
I was just going to respond to that briefly, Hector. So basically, again, the roof forms help to kind of lead your eye towards that entry. I mean, it's interestingly enough, the entry actually exists already in terms of a driveway. Unfortunately, Darren wouldn't let me move it. But regardless, it's there for a reason, because again, it's avoiding the mine shaft and things like that. But it's very obvious that's the only access to the site vehicular wise. And again, because of the nature of the buildings on the both A and B that have these direct access to the sidewalk, these patios and walkways. Again, and then there's a sort of central road between them. I think it'll be extremely obvious as to how to get into the site, because as soon as you have a car or a pedestrian that is at that point, you can see all the rest of the site. You can see the amenity building. You can see building C beyond. You get a really good glimpse into it.
There's another piece to that. As part of the subdivision, the city took covenants that restrict access. So there are no other driveways that are allowed to be built on these lots. So the access points are defined already. And so the lot across the street that Marie was asking about, there will be no direct parallel access opposite. It comes off of Grey J Lane, which is the other side. So all the entry points to the site are defined as is and covenanted by the city.
Yeah, no, as I was saying, I think I'm looking at the renders. I get the point what Dave is saying. I see the slope, like kind of the roof line sloping into that entry. But that was on my comment. I think could be more obvious, but again, that's just my comment, not necessarily something you guys need to change. And again, now going back into the more kind of like concerning issues that I'm sure a lot of people are gonna have. It's like, obviously, like building C, looking into the single family homes. I was looking at the renderings. The massing looks pretty big. I don't know if there's a way. I know, Darren, you're going to tell me no, but reduce the density of the building. Maybe so, like at least maybe at the end of C, or somehow like it doesn't look like it's such a big mass. As you say, I for what you explained at the beginning of the presentation, obviously those neighbors have some concerns about it. And then there's the parking variance. Basically, I think you're saying that you have 93 units and you have pretty much the same number of parking spots, right?
Yep.
I have a concern with that. I think you need to have at least some percentage for visitor parking. I don't know if that's 10% of the units, or like, let's say like the requirement was like 130 parking spots, right? And you have 95 units. If it's 10%, it's like an extra 10 parking spots. And I think it's really important. Right now I live in a townhome complex that basically we have one parking per unit, and we have a lot of street parking, and it's a problem. Like there's always people trying to park illegally outside, people fighting for parking. And so yeah, that's a big concern for me. I know that it's a very challenging site, but
I would just comment across the way. This is a very interesting site in that the context has changed significantly since the parking regulations were written. And so if you go across Potter Works Way, the parking bylaw changes to zone 3. So there's the line of the change in parking requirements is the road that was built. And so the context of 1960 Mountain Vista has changed significantly as far as connectivity and transportation. And so we're only asking for a 10% variance from what's required across the street.
Yeah, so the other thing I would add to that is, as Darren mentioned, this is the only, like Mountain Vista, I mean, it's not a huge long street, but in front of this site with its mounds and all of its frontage, there's one entrance. And then on the other side, there's no entrances. And so there's actually a fair bit of street parking that people can use, whether it's for this or other places, that front this property directly and actually tie into the existing trail system as well. And so, you know, I would estimate there's probably a good 10 on our side, and probably
like
even
30.
even more.
It's like 30 stalls.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and a lot more on the other side. And so,
Well, just on our frontage, there's about 30 stalls.
yeah, so there's actually quite a bit, and it wouldn't make sense that people would park there and go somewhere quite beyond there. Like, you know, in some cases in the city, that's not the case, but in this particular location, you could definitely make a case that a lot of that parking would be people that could visit the site quite easily.
Yeah, as I say, I will leave it to the other panels of a member, but I have a concern about it. I think it would be nice to have at least 8 visitor parkings or something. Offer something more than just like 1 parking per unit. But again, that's my comment. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Hillary, do you want to comment?
Sure, thank you. Great presentation. I think a lot of thought has obviously gone into this project. Providing more affordable housing options is amazing, and I do obviously think the lower number of parking spaces does sort of tie into the ability to create that. I really appreciate the inclusion of the number of accessible units. The energy efficiency items are great. I don't have an issue with the height variance. I see why it's necessary and appropriate in this area. The access to the refuse area, obviously there's a staff comment and that's already being addressed. I think it's really interesting that there's a separate building for the bike storage. I think that's super cool and new for Nanaimo, I believe. So yeah, really interesting to see, and I think cool to see a brownfield site reimagined in this way. And I really love the renderings. I think it's a beautiful look. It's quite different than what we normally see, and I really like it. So yeah, overall great job, and I'm looking forward to hearing the feedback from the rest of the panel.
Thanks, Hillary. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation from the design team and the developer. Yeah, overall, I like kind of all the new ideas that you're bringing in with trying to get more interaction between residents, and redeveloping a brownfield is always good to see. I know they're hard to develop, and they often sit empty for a long time, so it's good to see something happening here. And yeah, the buildings, I like how it's kind of a new idea. We haven't seen this kind of design before, so it's nice to have variety when we get new developments. I'm a landscape architect rather than building, so I'll leave building comments more to the architects on the panel. But I did find that, like, I felt like the brown was maybe a bit too dominant, especially like above the top level of windows. It felt like it was kind of weighing the building down a bit, and I don't know, there's something about that I didn't like, but that was just my initial reaction. But I'm still excited to see something different in terms of architecture. So let's see here. Yeah, there was a staff comment about the pathway through the restoration area. It was called out as gravel. I do agree that a hard surfacing would be more appropriate for an urban context like this over gravel. And yeah, I was also kind of like Hector, a little concerned about the building. Which one was it? I think the building C. Just in the rendering, that kind of showed the view of that building from the houses to the north. It did seem a bit dominant, like so. Yeah, I think there was a staff comment about ways to increase building separation and the adjacent single family. So that was just something that stood out to me. I know in the presentation, I think Darren mentioned they've done some outreach and open houses to the residents around. So it sounds like they're being proactive on addressing those concerns. But that was just something that stood out to me from the renderings. There was also a staff comment about the privacy enclosures along the those sunken patios along the street, and I felt like those enclosures or privacy screens were maybe a bit too tall. They just seemed to stand out from the building a bit too much and maybe disrupt the view a bit more than they need to. So maybe reducing that a bit, reducing the impacts of those a bit. Just looking at the planting design, overall, looks like a good mix of species. I was just maybe a little concerned about the use of the Gary oaks. I know it's a native tree species, and it's nice to incorporate kind of those unique native species. But I think Gary oaks are kind of hard to cultivate artificially, and I don't know if maybe in the restoration area testing those out would be good. I don't know if I would choose that as like a featured tree right by the main amenity building, just because it might not be successful there. It just might not like that condition.
I can speak a little bit to that, Jonathan. Just there is a Gary Oak meadow on this hill to the north. There is a flat plateau that has about 40 Gary Oaks planted on it, and there are Gary Oaks along the streetscape and some of the street trees as well. So that was just a carry forward, trying to carry that rhythm through. And you're right, it's not easy to grow them, but we probably have about 70% of them that are growing, but they grow at a Gary Oak speed. So.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you've had success with them, then that's good. I know they can be tricky, and it'd be unfortunate if one of the featured trees kind of just died out and didn't really grow. Yeah, and I wasn't sure like if you could even get those at a 6 centimeter caliper, but if you've got a source, then go for it. There was on the planting plan between building C and the adjacent residence, there was a tree species. The code was AL, and I didn't see that tree on the plant list. So, wondering if you could clarify what species was there. It just seems like a important row of trees with the residents being so close.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure where that code went off the plant list. It was going to be a red alder.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was mention in the rationale that like the houses to the north are currently zoned for a higher height. So when they're redeveloped, they'll probably be taller than this development. So I'm just thinking that could lead to, I guess it got me thinking about how do the rooftops look on these buildings, if in the future the neighbors will be looking down at them. So I guess, is there something you can do to make the rooftops more attractive if there's going to be future overlook?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the overlook will be that intense or anything. Like they would be above on the northeast corner, but not on the northwest corner, and only by like half a level. So it's not like a crazy amount or anything. And then we have the potential as well to add solar in the future for those buildings as well, and it's something we're contemplating. We can't commit to it yet, but it's something we've been discussing. So all of those other buildings, all the residential buildings, will be solar ready. So the intent is to go in that direction. So we can't really add stuff to that building, so because we are actually thinking of putting some solar on there too.
Okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure that didn't get forgotten. On the planting plan, the transition from the lawn to the natural restoration area. I'm wondering, I guess on the, I think on the, what would that be? East side, there's like a row of shrubs or something, but on the west side, it's just lawn going into the lawn.
Is this on the back of building A?
No.
Yeah, building A, there's planting shrubs leading up to the restoration kind of area, but on the opposite side from building C, it's just, I guess, lawn butting up against it, and I'm just wondering how that transition would look over time. It might look a bit messy as like the natural stuff kind of invades the lawn a bit, but so maybe some sort of buffer between that would make sense.
I think the lawn and the rendering might be more refined than we were intending. Danica, what were we planning to plant there?
That's going to be hydroseeded to native grass, just because that area actually has quite a bit of a slope on it.
Okay.
So just looking at what to do there with the wheels of the vehicles parking there, and trying to maintain that. So it'd probably just be mowed to keep it under control.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah.
that kind of transition, Jonathan, the center of the two hills, so that where that gravel path is planted with a wild seed and wildflowers. And so it already has that now. And the intent was just to carry that kind of feel through. So when you leave our site, it feels like you're leading right into that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I didn't see a detail for I guess there's some short-term bike racks at some of the entrances or something. I didn't see a detail for the rack, so I'll just throw in my general comment about choosing a bike rack that has 2 points of contact with the bike frame, just for more security and stability for a wider variety of bikes.
That's tippy.
Fair enough.
And I guess just on Hector's comment about the hill, it got me thinking like it might be nice to have like a path that went to the top of the hill or something. I feel like if I was a child growing up in those buildings, it would be kind of fun to go to the top of the mountain.
Well, you can right now.
Yeah, they exist.
Yeah, they exist already.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a gravel path that goes up both hills.
Yeah, and one of the shots that I showed in my presentation actually was from the hill looking down onto the building site. So,
okay.
So you could actually go there. You can go there tomorrow if you like.
Our plan, our feeling is the exact same. We've all been kids playing in forest. That's our hope, is that you have these things with kids doing what kids do in the forest, right? So.
Okay. And the variances, I mean, they definitely stand out. Just the numbers of it, like 3 to 4 meter variance is pretty significant for building height, and then parking reduction by 4, I don't know what that is, like 30-40% is also pretty significant. But I think all those were kind of pretty well justified in the presentation. So I guess the thing that kind of struck me was like it kind of saying that the current zoning for the property isn't really appropriate. So you're sort of going by the zoning of like an adjacent, you're kind of treating it like it's zoned like an adjacent property and just asking for variances rather than rezoning. But I don't know, it seemed like a different way to go about it for me. I don't know how the city usually feels about that kind of thing, but I think the variances seem well justified, and as long as you're like talking to the neighbors and trying to address their concerns, then I'm okay with that. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'll just leave my comments at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Angie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. It was really thorough, and it's clear that there's been a lot of thought and consideration put into this project. So I appreciate that. Again, I kind of, the variances are fairly significant, but I think the rationale in the documentation and in your presentation here, it really helps to kind of understand where those are coming from and why they're justifiable. And also the additional bike parking and the variation in bike options, I think, is really important here. It's a really I think it's a great site for bike connection and for accessibility to the city. So I think that there's an opportunity there to have this as a bit of a kind of forward-looking development, which is great. One question I had, just I saw in some of the renders, it looks like there is some outdoor amenity, like some benches and some maybe like a patio area. It looked like by the common or like the amenity area. I was just curious if you could kind of speak to if there's anything in particular beyond that, or kind of what the plan is for the outdoor amenity space.
The plan, I think, is to let the residents have a bit of say in it as they move in, like whether it's patio furniture or portable pieces. It wasn't meant to be kind of guessing the future. It was meant to be kind of adaptable. It's space that people can use as they see fit. That's why we have sort of two rooms there. We know people have cultural events they like to hold in smaller rooms, and people that have larger gatherings, and just to let them define that space a little bit over time.
Okay, that's good. Okay, and one thing I did notice on the plans for some of the accessible units, I know the elevation might make it tricky, but it looks like there's maybe stairs as the street connector. If they're, I don't know if you consider kind of ways to create accessible paths there, if it's possible to do within the space constraints, but yeah, that would be maybe.
We did go through that, Angie. We basically went through the rationale of they're totally accessible from the inside, and the stairs are convenience to the street. So if someone does rent who can't use those stairs, I agree. If they're wheelchair, if that's the mobility we're talking about, there's many types of mobility challenges that are fine with stairs. But if that person can't, you're right, that stair isn't useful. But they're totally accessible from the inside still, and they still have use of the lower patio. That's where we sunk them in. And so they have use of the space, even if the stair isn't appropriate for the specific tenant.
That's good. Yeah, as long as you kind of thought about it and considered how that might be possible, I think that's kind of the main thing. I know it can be challenging with the elevation change there, and yeah, I think the patio space will still be a really nice bonus for those spaces as well. I agree with the staff comment about, and it sounds like maybe other comments as well about the refuse area. Just kind of having another look at that and see if there's a way to make it more accessible would be great. But otherwise, I think yeah, it's a great development. I think it is a bit unique to what we usually see, so I'm looking forward to seeing it go ahead here. If there is an opportunity to create a bit more landscaping between the single family homes and the development, I think that will go a long way. But yeah, just best of luck with the development.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Angie. Okay, first of all, I just want to say that in terms of form and character, I just love this this project. It's really refreshing to see such an aesthetically interesting and thoughtful project that formally fits into the neighborhood context. Other than the height, I know that's a problem, but you're dealing with a division between some very different properties at this point in the life of this property. I'd also like to commend you guys for really integrating community spaces into a rental project. We rarely see that. We looked at it was actually a co-housing project recently, which had this sort of similar ideas of a separate amenity building and community space for the residents. And I think this is really commendable and wonderful, and really appreciate you guys bringing this forward. And again, also inclusion of so many accessible suites. I was noticing that some of them are even 2 bedrooms. That's recognizing that people with disabilities actually don't always live alone. And I think this is, again, something we were sorely lacking in this city. And I think this is just doing such a great job for that. So really appreciate that. And also appreciate the bike storage, recharging, all those things. Speaking of bike storage, I'm wondering if mobility carts will fit into these spaces that you've made, both in the individual units and in the larger area of parking that you have in the amenity building. Are they
so in the suites, if they fit their door, they'll fit in the storage, as long as someone doesn't use the storage overly compactly.
Yeah.
And the storage on the bikes, we're not planning to delineate them. The intention is that those would be secure for the users, and the space could be flexible. So if there was a couple that had, because we really don't know what's coming in the future, and we just wanted to make sure there was something there for smaller electrical transportation modes, whether it's scooters or carts or bikes or something we don't know of yet. we want to make sure the space is available for it.
Well, I'm thinking with so many accessible suites, you might have somebody who can't really ride a bike, but they can ride a mobility scooter that needs to be recharged and park somewhere safe and that kind
And I
of thing.
didn't mention it, but all the stalls in the units do have charging plugs as well. So they have a plug in the suites as well.
Great. Okay, that's great. Let's see. Find my space where I was here. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, just kind of looking at the form and character. I did have some comments. The first thing that really stuck out to me is I think you've designed some lovely buildings, and then I look at those privacy dividers between the ground floor patios, and they just shout out to me that they don't belong. And I looked at their composition, their stained cedar panels, which tend to, they have to be there. They need a lot of maintenance, and they tend to look really bad after a while. So I think I have to agree. I think Jonathan mentioned the height for one. They seem like overly high, and I'm wondering if there's a way that you guys can think of a way of blending them in a bit better. Like, I understand why they're there, but I'd like to see them more blend into the building. So either using that dark brown finish, the same thing, or even maybe some of the accent colors and lowering it or shaping it with an angle, or it's just like this intrusion to me visually. All of them.
It is a bit of a contrast.
I'm looking at David, the architect, but I think we're happy to revisit that and hearing the comments from across the panel. So we value you guys' opinion, and we'll have another look at that for sure.
Yeah, I'd hate to see that, like everything else in that building outside. I think it's
so clean and
yeah. And then I look at that and think, what are those doing there? So let's not. They should disappear, basically, somehow. Anyway, so we'll put that as a recommendation. You can work on that. The parking, I agree, can be a challenge, and I don't think you can really officially count 30 street parking as part of your parking, so that doesn't cover it. I'm also wondering about, do you have like visitor parking for handicap parking close to the building or the entrances, or are those assigned spot? Are they going to be assigned spots?
And I guess that's where this all comes down to, and it's trying to crystal ball who's going to rent this space. There are a fair number of studio apartments as well as one bedrooms, and we believe there'll be a lot of renters that don't have cars. We've done other developments in the past where they don't all rent up because people look for alternative options, and so that's kind of the bet on the developer's part, is that we think there will be quite a few renters that won't want to have a car. And if we're wrong, we need to drop.
Exactly. Well, no, but if we have a one bedroom with two people living there, and each have a car. So yeah, I mean, which it'd be great ideally. Yeah. Yeah,
and if we're wrong, that's kind of on us to lower the rent to the point that we find the person who wants to rent without a car.
Well, my concern, I think, is if are there any assigned visitors spots on the property, or are you sort of seeing visitors all parking on the street?
I think there's only one. I think we actually ended up gaining a stall to 94 at the end of the day, but there's only one extra stall. So there's 93 or 94 stalls as we worked through it. There was one change I think we made, but there's no dedicated visitor stalls on site right now. We could look at that if that was the recommendation. I kind of thought of the off-street parking as more the visitor parking.
Well, I'm thinking if you have somebody who's visiting who's got disabilities and has to, walk all the way around and they can't park,
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, fair enough. I think in that case, it makes a lot of sense to have that on site. Sure.
Yeah, and so that means you're reducing your resident parking even more, but I'd rather see some of that dedicated for those instances. The other thing I was thinking about is you might have a dedicated spot or work with the city to have one on the street, but for a car share. So if you've got these small units, there's these companies now. I've had a couple proposals where that's been included. Or even the building is buying a car and using it, but that's another, that's maybe more of a condoized private building. Okay. But you might find that then people are willing. There's only the few times that they need to run out and get a car when they have to go up to the other end of the city for something and buy something and bring it back. Otherwise,
we'd love to do that. I think you see a couple people on the call. One of them is my dad. One of them is my brother. Other parts of the development team, and my dad and I are part of Moto, so we are users of shares as well. So,
right, and I know Moto. We've talked about they do a study of how many
Yeah, maybe they'd be
area.
interested once the other sites develop, but they're harder to get in before the sites develop.
Yeah, and you may not get it right next door, right there, but maybe close by, but yeah. Anyway, those are just a couple suggestions that might mitigate the problem of, parking. And encourage people who rent there to rent people to, if they know there's no parking. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, it's demand, right? If they really need parking, maybe they'll go live somewhere else where there is parking. So, okay. I'm also wondering about maybe adding some permeable paving to your parking lot in places. It's a lot of blacktop, and of course in your renderings they look wonderful. But of course they're always going to be covered with cars, but it's a lot of. So I'm just even on the crosswalk somewhere instead of the white stripes, that kind of thing. Visually, it would improve that area, I think, and also help to drain water, etc. So I'm just
on that, if you don't mind, Marie. So I think in the rationale we did talk about contrasting color of sidewalks, so the crosswalks. So that's something that didn't make it to the renderings, but was indicated in the rationale. So I agree that would help with the wayfinding as well. Yeah. And this site's a bit unique in another way we didn't touch on is all the stormwater from this site goes directly into the detention pond just across the street. So there's a large detention pond for the city. And so we're doing treatment and on-site retention, but the normal infiltration and that kind of stuff isn't required by the city on the site because it goes directly into an infiltration pond across the street. And so the normal value on the stormwater side of permeable paving isn't as much, but definitely the contrasting color on those and wayfinding benefits was intended. It just didn't make it to the renderings.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think, yeah, even permeable paving, changing colors, that kind of thing, just break up that black surface would be really nice.
Good point.
Yeah, I think that's my list. So, okay, well, need to kind of round this up and see what our recommendations are that are remaining. Hector, were you wanting a recommendation regarding emphasizing the entrance to the site or not?
I think, no, I don't think we need it. It's as I say, I can
made your comment.
Yeah, so we can just leave it as a comment. Yeah.
Okay, and so then we could recommendation 1, consider including on-site visitor park, a few on-site visitor parking spots. A few of us mentioned that, and I also consider a hard surface path to the forested area. I also thought that was a good one for myself. I missed that one, but I thought you've got a lot of disabled people using mobility scooters or wheelchairs. I mean, it does make it easier for them to go and access that forest area as well. So that would be a good recommendation.
Just look at that a little bit. There's a flat path, and then there's paths that are very not flat. The ones that go up the hill, I think, would be never accessible because they are more of a walk through a forest and quite steep.
Oh, okay.
But there is one that is more of a flat path. It's more of a network connectivity path that I think would make more sense to entertain that on.
Yeah, so they could use it as well. Yeah, okay. All right. Choosing a bike path. Okay. And consider choosing bike racks with 2 points of contact on the bike. It's Jonathan's favorite. Building C, did you and Jonathan, Hector, did you want to make a recommendation regarding Building C? You both made some comments about it, but I was unable to kind of come up with anything concrete there.
I did hear something about additional plantings to try to mitigate that from Jonathan, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the city staff comment had something about that, about additional planting to help screen that building C.
Along which side of the building?
Between building C and the residents to the north, the houses to the north.
Yeah, I would recommend that if the architect can find like some sort of screen element beyond the vegetation. I think on building B, where you have the single loaded apartment, you did like some vertical sort of louvers to screen the corridor. So I don't know if you can incorporate something like that, some sort of that texture on building C between the single between the single homes and building C. Is that something you guys can entertain, or?
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out how that would work with the fence. Like, I think we'd already be rebuilding the fence line, I believe, in that area to some degree. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the state exactly of is in that area, but
the neighbors to agree. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. It's obviously on their property too. And so having a kind of screened area, are you thinking above that somehow? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how that would kind of work.
Well, I was looking at the elevation of building A, where you have the open corridor.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
I understand.
know.
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. I'm just trying to figure out on building C, it's a different condition, so I'm trying to visualize that, and maybe there's something there. I'm just trying to figure out where.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking because you have the windows looking into the other houses on the backyard. It's like, I don't know if there's like some concept of. Anyways, for recommendation, I will say my recommendation would be keep the consultation with the neighbors, and if they agree with the building, just proceed as design. Or
the people that showed up to that community consultation, we did actually have conversations like that, and so I think Darren was quite good in answering some of their questions. But I guess as well is that I don't, maybe Darren can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was some discussion of planting some trees in their yard too to help screen as well if necessary. They didn't seem to be super concerned about it, but they seemed to think that might be a good way forward. So,
I mean,
it wasn't an offer we made. There was, when we did the residential thing, we had specifically one of the neighbors was there, and his was closer to building B, not building C. And he was, so we talked about that overlook and offered to do a rendering for him. And the concern seemed not to be as big after the meeting, but we offered to do some planting in his yard if it helped as well.
So yeah, I guess recommendation would be just planting to screen building C from neighbors. Yeah.
So consider additional plantings between building C and residences to the north to increase privacy.
Yep.
Okay, good. Consider alternate material and scale of privacy panels on ground floor patios to better fit with the architectural presence of the building. Consider including a dedicated car share parking stall. Working with the city to have one on the street. Consider adding some area of permeable pavement on the parking lot. Other elements to break up. Black surface.
Maybe instead of permeable, just like decorative paving or something.
Oh, okay. Areas of decorative paving. That could be all sorts of things. Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so that's 7 recommendations. And although I've heard some issues about the variances, I think generally everybody's willing to support them. No dissension there. Okay. All right. So that if I can have a motion to accept the project as presented with 7 recommendations and support for the variances. You want to make that motion? Hector, seconder, Angie, all in favor? Great. Okay.
Well, thank you. It's really nice to hear some feedback that this newer design, we're a little worried how it would go over because that's not the typical, but we're really happy with it and excited to bring it. So thank you.
I'm excited too. I'm so tired of seeing the same, it's sort of the same design rejigged every time, especially rental apartments. And it's just such a pleasure to see somebody take the time and effort to really put some thought into it and think about the residents. Like that's great. And good job. I'm looking forward to seeing it. So
thank you for your time this evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and panel, I think there's no other business, so if we can have a motion to adjourn for the evening. Do you want to make that motion? Angie, seconder Jonathan, all in favor? Don't see any objection to that. Okay, good night, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Okay, thanks.